Hey everyone, my name is Jan Six and I'm a product designer working at GitHub. This talk is about how design tokens can make us better collaborators. And while it's focused around the topic of design tokens, it's no introduction on them. Instead, it's heavily focused around one topic, that is a source of truth. A source of truth where design decisions live that make up your product or brand. A source of truth where design decisions such as color, spacing, type, shadow, radius, but many others live. But that could also be UX patterns, components, or even assets. The list goes on and on. So it's basically whatever you want to put in this single source of truth that makes up your product or brand. In the context of Figma, Figma is where designers work. The source of truth is where these decisions are defined that I was talking about. And what your users experience, the thing on the right, that might be something else entirely. Often there is this gap between Figma and the source of truth, and even what your users experience. And that can lead to problems. If Figma is not the source of truth, then trying to sync those changes back is something that has to be done manually. Like changes happen in code constantly, a color change, a typography change, maybe a radius change. And trying to keep those two in sync is a pain that many designers will know. I'd like to highlight different ways to define your source of truth. First being, you might not have one yet, and you might not even need one yet. You might still be in this very early explorative phase where speed matters more than landing on a system, where a system itself would slow you down a bit. So you might not need a source of truth yet. You might have many places for design decisions, and that's fine at this phase. Then you might set Figma as your source of truth. With the Figma REST API, we can read design decisions that were created in Figma, such as color, text, or effect styles. With the help of plugins, we could also read some more decisions, such as design tokens, based on layer names or structures of your frames. And at some point, you might need to transform that to code. So you read these decisions, transform them to something that your users will experience, which is, for example, CSS variables, or something that iOS and Android can then read. So the real source of truth might be somewhere in between these two. As Michael puts it in his tweet, while Figma is usually the source of truth for deriving design tokens, it is not the source of truth of the design system per se. Users ultimately see the design system as represented in code, and hence, the code is the source of truth, the current version of the design system. This is something that resonates well with me, as I think that our source of truth should live really closely to what our users will experience. So it's really much closer to the right, to what your users will experience, where we should place that source of truth. And if there is a disconnect between any of those, that could be a problem. So I'd like to show you a process where the source of truth is defined outside Figma. A process where we can read and write to and from Figma to this source of truth. And by sharing this source of truth with code, we get even better collaboration. We can then transform this source of truth to whatever output that we need, for example, CSS variables, by using this source of truth. And by having design tokens be that source of truth, we get to have this standardized format. The W3C design tokens community group is currently working towards a draft to standardize design tokens. So in the future, tool A could talk to tool B about design decisions. And I think that is something that is really exciting, and I think will open up a lot of possibilities. So what are design tokens? A quick recap on that one. Design tokens are basically design decisions stored in a platform agnostic way. That could be color, type, radius, any of these decisions. And by abstracting them, like in this example, the color white from a hex value to something more abstract, we can create these semantic themes. And that makes creating themes really fun. We also have the platform agnostic part of things where we are not bound to one specific platform, but instead can transform that to any platform, like CSS variables again. Some 2 years ago, I started to create the Figma tokens plugin, which has around 30,000 installs now, I would think. It allows you to create, manage, and apply design tokens inside Figma, even for properties that don't have native support yet, such as radius or spacing. It can effectively serve as this bridge between Figma and your source of truth. So it can be this link between these two worlds that we need. So after all that talk and the source of truth outside of Figma, I think it's time for a demo. So let me show you. So in this example, I have a design in Figma, and that is set up with the Figma tokens plugin. You can see design tokens there, and I've set up the same as a website using design tokens as well. And I want to change a decision. In this case, the color blue and that theme. You can see that color across the page. And I want to change that to a purple. So I'm going to do that. I also want to change a decision that I made on a button to change the radius we were using there to something larger, the XL one. And this is changing a non-native property now. Also, I want to change the spacing on the cards. So to use less spacing now. And on the vertical one as well. All right, so now that I'm done with that, I want to push my changes to my source of truth. In this case, GitHub. So I can create a new branch, much like Figma's branch feature. And I now want to give that whole thing meaning with a commit message, so others will know what change that I just made. And once that is done, I can then push my changes up to GitHub, where it's then being created. Okay, once that is done, I can now create a pull request, and that allows me to see all the changes that I made. So I can create that pull request, review these changes now, look at all the files that were changed. In this case, I can see there are three files that were changed. And now what's going to happen in the background is that we will deploy a new preview to Vercel, which allows me to view my page, the one that I was showing you before, to view this version where I was making changes with these new design tokens that I was just pushing. All right, so let's look at the changes, and we can now compare that. It's the purple, the radius on the buttons, and I can see these changes have been applied. So that is perfect. I, as a designer, was now able to make changes to the website itself. So why are we doing this? What's the benefit to all that? First of all, it lets us all speak the same language, using tools we feel most comfortable in. Everyone gets to own their domain, like designers Figma and engineers code, while we are all collaborating on the same source of truth. There's no need to jump out of your own comfort zone while we are all working on the same source of truth. We also don't need to magically create any code. It's really just all working on the same common standard. We can read and write to that same source of truth and then transform that. In this example, I was using Style Dictionary to convert my design tokens to CSS variables. It's also allowing designers to actually implement changes, even on their own. It's no longer this handoff. Instead, it becomes this living, iterative process where everyone gets to take part on the thing. Now you might ask, are we sure we want to let everyone make changes just like that? And I feel like that is one of the most exciting parts. Like the approval process we get with that allows us to confidently review and approve changes to our design decisions. And somebody who might not have been confident in code can now make these changes. So I think that's really exciting. So this is how this flow could look like. I make a change in Figma. I change the source of truth. I make that change on a branch because I don't want to change the real thing that my users currently experience. So I create this pull request. And that pull request can trigger some things, such as a staging website, this preview that I was just showing you. But we could also update documentation for Storybook. We could run tests. For example, does this still meet my accessibility standards? And many more, basically. If we then feel that these changes are not good enough, we could request changes. Or if we feel they are, we could just merge it in. And that in turn creates a new build for the production website, basically. It could trigger anything else, really, whatever you can think of. It could even sync back to Figma, which is quite nice, I would say. So a couple of best practices that I've gathered while I was working on this plugin and this space for the past 2 years now. I think these should serve as a helpful starting point for you. Don't take all of these for granted, but just treat it as helpful starting points. Make this whole thing a collaborative effort. Design and engineering should really share this project from the start. By just setting up this process, we get a better collaboration and better understanding for the whole team. Make sure to set up workshops with everyone. Make sure to define requirements and goals upfront so everyone knows what it is they want to get out of this project. Show value and build trust in using design tokens. Show the efficiency this can bring. An automated system like this can really lead to more trust and less time implementing changes. If you can, work on this proof of concept, showing what value this brings. And if you have engineering support, use that. Use engineering support to show it with this living prototype. And even without engineering support, you can just work on a Figma prototype showing how that could work in this mock scenario, basically. And expect things don't work the first few times you do this. A lot of these tools are still in its infancy, so expect that things go wrong. Be prepared that it will take a lot of time as well. A lot of this stuff wasn't built before, so a lot of our tools that we are building is really new. So there will be bugs, there will be setbacks. Expect those. And make sure that you're aligned on the goals that you've set, because that gives you this vision of where you want to go and how you want to get there. But plan extra time for setbacks. Next up, seek help. I think this is one of the most helpful communities out there in this rapidly evolving space. Everyone seems to help each other. So just share what you learned so others don't really have to start at zero. You could join communities such as the Design System Slack and also just ask others how they solved the same problem that you are facing. You could go on Twitter to do that, for example. Make sure you define who's responsible. That could be someone that acts as a bridge between the two departments, design and engineering, a designer that loves to code, or an engineer that loves to design. That could be this UX engineer on your team. If nobody like that is in your company, try to seek outside help. Try to seek somebody you can contract work and bring them on board for this very first phase of your design tokens journey. Make sure to encourage contributions. Anyone can make changes now and anyone can make suggestions. So I think you should really focus on making it as easy as possible to do that. The least friction for feedback is required here. That could be GitHub issues, GitHub discussions, basically anything that is actionable where you can then 3 months down the road act on that feedback. You should not get lost in endless Slack messages. This should be searchable, something you can find later on. And building a pipeline like I just did with this preview deployment builds up confidence to review and make suggestions. Next up, and this is the last one, I think one of the most important ones, document what you learned and document design tokens. Make sure that the documentation for design tokens is available where they are consumed. That could be Figma, that could be Storybook, and that could be code. Do that from the very beginning, even if it's really just you. It will help to show to stakeholders and leadership what value this can bring, but also to the next person that is about to join, to understand what decisions you made for this specific section. So I previously mentioned everyone should work in their own tools. Designers work in Figma, engineers rather work in code. So let me show you that round trip that I was talking about before. So this is VS Code, my code environment. I now want to check out the branch that I was creating in Figma, the one that I was making changes on. You can see on the left side that I have the same token structure that I had in Figma, in the Figma tokens plugin. I now want to change the purple color that I previously had back to a red color that I just want to change back to. So I go into this brand A JSON now, and that should bring up some colors. Let me go into that, and I can see the purple one being visible as the selected line. And I now want to change that to something more red. Our team defined this should just be red. So I can see all those tokens here. And I want to change all of these accent colors now. I'm going to change that to a red. All right. So while I was making these changes, you can also see all these other values. These are all of types. These are basically design tokens. And I can make changes to all of them, which have an effect on the theme that was being created in Figma. So I could just use that. All of these accent colors basically use the same source. So it's this global set of colors, this global variables that we are using. I'm not changing that all to red. And once that is done, I want to then push this again to my source of truth, because ultimately it shares the same source of truth that I was using in Figma. In my case, that is GitHub. So I could just do that and push these changes up there. So once I feel confident with these changes, I can then select all of them and push those changes. Before I do that, I want to change one more radius decision that I was having, like the very large radius that I was having on the button, the XL decision. I'm going to change that to a 0, which is no radius at all. So it's really just these very sharp corners and edges. And that is what our new brand will look like. So I'm going to change that to this one. All right, now that is done, I can do the same thing that I did in Figma. Remember, I was using this branch and I was adding this commit message. I can do the same thing here. So I can now take these two changed files, like the brand A file and the button JSON that I was just changing. I could save that, and I could then go into my changes, which you can see here, the source control changes. I could take both of these, push these over to GitHub. First of all, I want to add a commit message that is really descriptive and tells the other person what changes I was making. And as I'm making that, I can add something like, I changed these brand colors back to red. All right, once these changes are pushed, I'm just still gonna add some text here. But once I've pushed these changes up, what's gonna happen is the same thing as in Figma is gonna happen. I push these changes to the same pull request. So it's really using the same source of truth, right? So there is not a lot of stuff that is different here. Both of these tools are using the same decisions. There is no transformation happening in between, because Figma is then able to just consume those decisions. And once that is pushed, the same build pipeline will run that we have seen in Figma. So you should be able to see any tests that we might have defined, anything that would run in the background. We'd also see the preview environment update. So that is really awesome that I get to make these changes from within code and from within Figma. So if we now go back to the pull request that I've shown previously, we could see there is a new commit being added there. And that commit is then also able to, well, push any of these changes that I was talking about. So we can see there is a new commit here, and we can then see something is happening again in the background. Something is changing. But I could also go into Figma to look at these changes, and I could see in Figma that there might be an update. I might just want to pull these changes that an engineer has been making. So I can do that. I can go to Figma, and inside the Figma tokens plugin, we can then just pull these values. We can pull from the source of truth that was updated. So let me do that. I can pull from GitHub here, and that will just pull the newest values. An engineer might have told me, hey, check out these new values and make sure they look good, even in Figma. And now in Figma, I can just pull these changes, and with the click of a button, I could really update all of my design decisions. I could push the update button now, and what was purple will now be red. I didn't change anything here. I really only changed this source of truth that my engineer has changed. And I was just pulling newest values in. So I think that is part of a workflow that works really well, saves a lot of time, and I feel like will really improve the process overall, the collaboration between design and engineering. All right, so if we go back to the slides now, we could see that this process works basically really well. So there is a lot of reasons why design tokens are awesome, but I feel that the collaboration aspect of this really stands out for me. It just allows us all to really work on the same goals. So let's recap. It all increases efficiency. There is no need to sync decisions back and forth manually. The approval process becomes one that many can take part in. And by using automations like these that I've just shown, we gain confidence in the changes that we're making. We also remove silos. So by using this shared language, teams work together on this one shared source of truth. And everyone still owns their own domain. We as designers get to work in Figma, engineers stay in code, but we're all working on the same source of truth, working in the tools we feel most comfortable in. We also create this shared understanding by just embracing this process. It helps to create this feeling of shared ownership, of working towards a common goal. We're also able to surface problems and solutions that otherwise would have been kept to the teams. So I think that is all really awesome. That's it from me. If you want to find out more about embracing this process, working with design tokens inside Figma, using the Figma tokens plugin, connect with me on Twitter. Thank you.